All right, so prior to trimming your stone or plaster models, you're gonna need to make some marks on it with a pencil. So we'll have a ruler for you and what we call a bully gauge to mark some of those areas. Because our goal is you guys have your perfect set that you poured up with the rubber mold week 1, and that has the exact cuts and measurements that we will be trimming our other models for. So these are a great example to have out to know what we're looking for, how the cuts go, and all of that. So for maxillary, for one, the difference is it comes to a point. We cut it to a point at the midline for the maxillary. And then there's also a point at the canine, so on the distal of the canine there. And then the lateral cuts are parallel with the angle of the teeth. It's not straight. We keep it in line, like I said, or parallel with the arch itself. The posterior cut, you want to come in about 1/4 inch. So we're going to make a mark. We're going to take our ruler. So know what 1/4 inch is. If your model is already, which is this line right there, if your model doesn't have that much 1/4 inch past the maxillary tuberosity or the 3rd molar, then you won't really need to trim a whole lot. So this one, again, doesn't have a whole lot to trim, so we don't need to worry about that. And the same thing for mandibular. You want it to be 1/4 inch past the retromolar pad. So again, you see that it's right there anyway, so I'm not gonna have to do much trimming on the posterior. Mandibular model and the anterior, it's rounded. So the big difference is you want to make sure that you do, when you cut yours, the mandibular anterior is rounded. The points are at the canines, between the canine and the first premolar, compared to maxillary, that there's a point at the midline, okay? When your models fit together, the base should be about 2.5 to 3 inches total height. So here, this one, I'll show you for example, is right about 2.5 inches, okay? And also when you set it on the countertop, it should be, your maxillary model should be parallel with the countertop. It shouldn't be tipped up or tipping down. The mandibular one, you see how the angle is actually sloped a little bit? That's how it should be. It should be higher in the posterior. In maxillary, it's actually lower in the posterior. So then when you fit them together, both models together, it's nice and parallel. If you guys notice on your occlusal surfaces of your models, if you have any of these little, like, I don't know what you want to call them, little, I call them nerds, but, or little nugget things, little chunks of plaster or stone, you can take this instrument, it's called a discoid cleoid, and you can just pop those out of the occlusal. And if you also notice if there's any in the facial or in the contacts, you can take an instrument and just kind of shape those up. That way they don't interfere with the bite, and that makes it look a little nicer. So make sure you get all those little pieces cleaned out of your model, and then you're going to take a pencil and we're going to draw a line directly down the occlusal groove of all the posterior teeth. This is more of a visual for you when you guys go to trim, to know that the wheel of the model trimmer should be parallel with that occlusal line, okay? So again, do both sides here, and the molars and premolars, and again, it's just a good visual when you guys are going to trim, to not keep your wheel flat, or you want the wheel to be parallel with the occlusal instead of having it out like this, okay? Because we want it to taper toward the canine. So you're going to do that on maxillary and mandibular. All right, so after you remove all the little beads, and if there's any on the lingual, you can get those. You're going to make another mark on the model right where your canine is, so out here, so that way you know where to your corners should be. So at the canine here, these marks just are a good visual when you're trimming, so you don't have to guess. And then we're also going to make a mark right in the midline for the maxillary, okay? Because in the maxillary, again, we have a point at the midline and then the points at the canine. So we have our line down the occlusal. I have my 1/4 inch in the maxillary tuberosity, and then at the canine, the midline, and then the other canine. And then your mandibular model, after you do your occlusal line, do the same thing. You're going to mark where your canine is, not the midline because we're rounded on the mandibular one, and then your canine over here. This big piece will probably end up coming off when we're trimming, but that's okay as long as you at least have something to go off of when you're initially starting to trim. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and trim our maxillary model first. So again, make sure you have your water on in the back, your shield is down, your water is on, and then we're gonna turn on our trimmer. The first cut you're gonna make is the posterior cut. So again, you wanna make sure that you're nice and parallel. If you have, if your model is a lot too wide and it won't fit on the platform, you may have to like trim some of that excess off prior to starting your actual cuts. But let's go ahead and get the first initial one. So again, we're going about a 1/4 inch behind the maxillary tuberosity. So we're gonna just push equal pressure. Make sure this line at the midline, you can, in this trimmer, you can keep it straight with the line that's on the platform, which is kind of nice. Alright, so I'm right about there. So now that I have a flat surface here, I'm going to turn it up on its end. And now we're going to cut, because my base is, this is from the stacked method, not the inverted, so it doesn't have a flat base. So I need to make that flat so it's easier to trim. Now that I have a flat base, now we're going to start doing our lateral cuts. So the first one, again, you're going to make sure the wheel is parallel with the line that we made on our occlusal surface. And if you get little pieces that break off as you're trimming, that's fine. Just kind of wipe those away. And you only want to take this in about a 1/4 inch from the buckle surface, okay? You don't want to go too far in because then you're going to lose anatomy that you need to keep there. So we're going to go ahead and switch sides. We'll do the other side. Okay, so now we're going to kind of take a look and see if we're even. We want to be symmetrical, so I may take this side in just a little bit before I move to the anterior. Alright, and you want to do straight cuts. You don't want to do a bunch of different angles because that's going to show on your model. You want it to be even cuts. So now let's go ahead and do our anterior. Again, we're going to cut from canine point to midline. Just be careful to watch the actual teeth. You don't want to cut those, so you want to leave again about a 1/4 inch from the facial surface to where your cut is. You can always take away, it's harder to put it back. So do smaller increments is a little easier. And that's okay if it has a point here. You can kind of just wipe those extra pieces off. And a little bit more. Okay, so then I have my point at my midline, point back behind the canine premolar, point at the canine premolar. So now, last thing. Well, for the maxillary, we're not going to worry about these cuts until we're done doing the mandibular cut. So we're going to go ahead and start on that. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and do our posterior cut on the mandibular model. Again, you want about 1/4 inch from the mandibular retromolar pad. So I won't have to do much on this one. Just a little bit. And then once that's cut, then you can do your base, because this is again from the stack method. Watch your fingers with the stone. You do have to apply quite a bit more pressure than you would for plastic. It's just a little more dense when you cut it. Okay, now that's flat. Now we're going to go ahead and do our lateral cuts again. We'll do the side here. Make sure you don't have any little pieces that make it rock or anything. You want it nice and flat. And just remove those little pieces. Again, you only want about 1/4 inch from the buccal surface, so not too far in. You want to really watch that. And we'll move to the other side. Again, it should taper the same as the angle of the arch itself. So again, look, see if you're symmetrical, if you need to take a little bit off one side or the other. I'm going to do just a little bit more here. And then now we're going to go ahead and do our rounded cut here. So how you do that is you start at one canine, and you just roll. The model. Get those pieces that fall, that's okay. I'm going to go a little bit more. And it should come out rounded just like that, okay? Again, the point should be canine premolar area, canine premolar area. And we have our base cut. So now, with some of these, is where you're going to take your wax bite with your maxillary model, fit the wax bite on the model itself, and we're going to do our posterior angle cut. So these should line up. If they're already even, we don't have to make any more cuts there. They should be the same. One shouldn't be out further than the other. Look and see if it's getting hung up, if it's keeping the teeth from coming together, so I may need to trim that just a tiny bit there. And then make sure they fit together. You're going to set it on here, and it's just a really quick angle cut on the posterior corner. Again, you trim that with both of them together so they match. And you really want to watch that you don't take any anatomy away from the molars, okay? So they should match. And then you can take it apart. Again, if you have any, like this big piece of stone here in the palate area, that's where we could use our hand piece, the lab engine, and we could smooth that away so it's not keeping the models from coming together fully. Okay. When you're done with your cuts, you can put them in, we have them in a case can here. It's actually nicer to soak your models prior because it can fit both easier than just your green bowl. But don't forget to clean the wheel, just like you guys have practiced. And then you can turn that off. And this is where a lot of the little pieces are that need to be rinsed away. So you have still your green bowl. Let's rinse off our platform. And you'll go through the whole cleaning process that you guys have done with the model trimmer a couple weeks ago.